So I'm going to get the live streaming going. Sorry, I've been a bit hurried here. I wonder if, just for posterity, if we could just redo the first 3 minutes.
Sure.
Well,
We're frozen.
All right, we're now live stream. So if you'll indulge me, would you mind just going back?
Sure. Welcome everybody to the Discover Housing Alliance committee meeting. For whoever's keeping track, we're getting started at 6:06 p.m. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from last meeting, which there are none. So we'll move on to the next, the introduction of our new town council liaison, Jean Marie Caterina.
yes, thanks. Again, I'm happy to be here. I was asked by Paul Johnson if I would take over this position, in part because I have a very strong interest in affordable housing personally, and for my background as I've been in real estate for 20 years. Prior to that was a social worker. Very familiar with issues going on around affordability, not just, under the standard affordability, but also workforce housing. And I'm known on the council as I said, Ms. Workforce Housing, because I am trying to get some things done around that. So I look forward to participating with this committee.
Great. Well, we're thrilled to have you here, Jean Marie, and look forward to working with you and really keying in on working on more than strictly affordable housing, but also the workforce housing. I was talking with Tom, sort of noting that the name of our group is the Housing Alliance,
Right.
not just the Affordable Housing
Right.
Alliance. So we've got a pretty broad mission, and I think your background will be really helpful. So, thank you. Next on the agenda is the adoption of a remote meeting policy. Tom, can you
Yes,
take
I'm
this one?
hoping, yes, I am hoping that Eric can share a screen. There it is. Just to give, by way of background, the last legislative session, the legislature was successful in passing a law that enables public bodies, including committees such as this, to meet remotely. And so this policy really is fashioned after what the town council has done and what most, if not all, other town committees have done. Essentially, in a nutshell, the expectation is that members do attend in person, but there are qualified reasons for remote participation. You can see those at the top of the sheet here. And those reasons are, well, first and foremost, the existence of an emergency or urgent issue that requires full committee to meet remotely, a la pandemic, I suppose. Secondarily, for individual members, illness or other physical condition or temporary absence from the jurisdiction, if you're traveling or what have you. So this will come in particularly helpful. Just as an aside, Jean Marie will remember this. Councilor Hamel, right upon his election, traveled to Ireland, I believe.
Yeah.
And there was a pivotal vote. He actually got on a plane to fly back to cast his vote and got back on the plane the next day. This would have been a heck of a lot easier and cheaper for him. And as I said, the other certainly important component of this is the public's ability to connect remotely. And this hybrid approach gives us the ability to stream our meetings on YouTube. So there's a live stream plus an archive that's readily available. So I do recommend this committee consider and adopt this policy tonight.
Is there a motion to adopt the policy? Anybody?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
We do need to administer roll call votes. So I will do that, Mr. Chair. Is that
That would be
right?
great. Thank you, Tom.
All right, Mr. LaRue. Mr. Donovan,
Yes.
Boucher.
Yes.
Ms.
Taylor.
I call you by your last
Yes,
name. But
it
yeah,
is
I got your report.
fine.
Mr. Shumway
Yes.
and Ms. Katerina.
Am I a
Oh.
voting member? I'm not a voting member.
No.
That's why I asked.
Matter passes unanimously.
Great. Wonderful.
I would vote yes, but.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. Tom, thanks for putting that together.
Yes.
That was easy.
Next item on the agenda is just a check-in on our, meeting and kind of schedule rotation. We've, for the past long time, we've been meeting this is the third Wednesday of the month at 6 p.m. It's worked for people that have been on the committee in the past, but I think very few people from the past are on the committee still. So that'd be a good chance to check in and see how this time kind of frequency works for people's schedules. If there's, there any time or date changes that folks want to make. One thing I'll mention, just ask about, I'll start with, Jean Marie and Tom, just to see how this intersects with things like finance committee and town council meetings. I know there was kind of a string where there was a lot of overlap between this meeting and some of those where we weren't able to have our liaison. Were you there, Tom?
Yeah, well, it's chosen really because it's an off council week, so yeah, it's as good as anything.
right.
Yeah, I'll be able to work around it.
Same.
And I would agree. I mean, I think, it's an off council week, so it makes sense. And I know I'm the type of person, I've got to put it in my book in advance, otherwise it gets chewed up, so.
How about for others?
Yeah, I would prefer to see the meetings at 4:30 to 5 than at 6.
I have no problem with that. I'm at my desk anyways, so.
That may be just a conflict. I do have standing finance meetings on the third Wednesday at 4.
Yeah.
Space conflict.
I'm flexible. I mean, as long as there's enough notice, like Jean Marie said, I can plan around it, so.
Yeah, I know for me, 6 is nice because it's after work. But I think I could probably make, 4:30 or 5 work. Later is better. For me. Eric, how about you?
I'm as flexible as you, Brian. I think it's fine either way. Early's fine, late's fine.
Bill, are you okay with staying at 6, just to make sure that I can make it consistently?
Yeah, if you have a meeting at 4, Tom, then the earliest you could reasonably expect to get out of there is 5:30.
5:30. It's finance, Bill, so those don't happen very quickly.
Yeah.
How often are they, Tom?
Monthly,
Oh,
Every third.
same
third
day.
Wednesday.
Yeah, it's
Is there another off-council week besides this one?
If it's earlier in the day, I don't mind even meeting a council week. And if we can meet in this room, it's generally available. The council chambers does get taken up. So if there's another day of the week, I'll just need to check the master schedule. But generally speaking, this room is available.
As long as it's not 8 in the morning.
Yeah.
I went into real estate for a reason.
Tom, you think you could find another date that would be available for 4:30?
Sure. Yeah. It may be a different day of the week. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll report back to you at the next meeting what some options are.
Sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have a problem with Tuesday because I'm traveling to the offices, so
Okay. So no Tuesday. I'll avoid that altogether.
if possible, I mean, I could make it 5:30,
No.
probably 5:30 would be the earliest.
No, I'll try to avoid Tuesdays altogether.
Okay,
Good. I'll report back at the next meeting.
Great. Yeah, and actually, Tom, if you're able to do it by email in advance of the next meeting, it might be nice to get some feedback in advance so that we can,
Sure.
kind of, endorse a final, a final meeting time.
Great.
I'll check our schedules while we're at home or at work. Great. So now the meaty item, which is a workforce housing policy discussion.
Yay.
And Tom, you want to kick this off a little bit for us?
Yeah, we have actually Jean Marie to thank for spurring the discussion. I think many of us have been talking about workforce for years now, but now it's actually introduced and enshrined in ordinance, at least in a simple fashion. Jean Marie was successful in getting this notion of workforce housing inserted in the growth management ordinance, which is a little off topic, but we now have it again in ordinance.
Yeah.
We actually have folks that are interested in knowing more about that, and we're lacking a definition. So as Brian said, your mandate, I think, is broad enough. I think it's clearly within your mandate to be able to take up. And I'm certain the council would be very interested in getting some guidance in this regard. As an aside, for some of the newer members, this committee was the committee that actually came up with the definition that we are working with and still have for affordable housing. And I think there are a fair number of parallels. I don't mean to suggest that it's simply changing some percentages, because I don't think it's that simple, but by the same token, I don't know that it's a wholesale rework.
Yeah, it might be that simple.
It might be.
Yeah.
Do you guys use the HUD definitions?
Well,
Is that what
we
you use?
in the definition of affordable housing, we refer to the HUD published income
Yeah,
limits.
Yeah.
And then, use our own definition.
Because
of-
because that's what I've been working with. Oh, did you lose everybody? Okay, because that's what I've been working with when I talk to folks about, that it's up to 120%. It's that gap after affordable.
Yeah.
That of the HUD AMI median there
Yep.
that they use for Cumberland County, which is actually pretty high. I believe for a family, I want it's like 85,000 is the
Is that right?
income for one person,
Yep.
which sounds really high, but when you look at, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna grab you guys just for a minute, because I testified before the legislature. The legislative committee was a new committee up there on affordable housing and what they can do on it. And it was LD 609, and it establishes a commission for reviewing data on housing shortage and state laws that affect local regulation of housing, consider measures that would encourage increased housing options, and determine historical role of racism and race in zoning policies, and ensure that all zoning, municipal zoning, doesn't create barriers to racial equality. I will tell you that they're really hot on, they think that the root cause of the housing crisis is zoning and land use restrictions. I testified before them saying, yeah, I would agree with that, but in a town like Scarborough, we definitely have, our community has concerns about growing too quickly. We do have a growth management ordinance and whatever. I did tell them that the sold median in August for Scarborough was $582,500. That was the median price in Scarborough. And then last August, this is comparison, it was 451,000. So my point to them was, I think it's awesome. You guys are looking at, things like septic, and because now you have septic systems that, they're expensive, but you drink the water coming out the other end, whatever. But that being said, it's all about money, in my opinion, that we really need the state to step up with some bonds or whatever they did for senior low-income housing. That would be helpful with workforce. And then I just gave them some anecdotal information to them, my first-time home buyers who I show them 10 houses. We make offers on 10 houses. They don't get them. They can't stretch. And there's hardly anything available for them to even start with. So that's why I'm so wound up on the workforce housing. So
It's a hard problem.
it's a very hard problem. So that's just, what I explained to them about, where I come from, both as a counselor and a real estate broker. That, and maybe we need to work on a state level with definitions too, but I'm getting off. But I was using the HUD numbers with them.
Yeah.
That's why I asked.
Well, and that's helpful to have the context of the discussion and sort of punctuating, why it's so important. One of the things I'd like to talk about as a group here is how to to tackle dealing with, the fact that we don't really have a definition of workforce housing. And, one, kind of poll the group to see if this is a problem that we do want to tackle. And then, if it is, how we want to approach it. And I'll just, I'll mention that in the past, we've had some problems or some issues that we've tried to tackle, in the course of our meetings here at night. And sort of, the once a month dealing with it as a committee. And we've had other issues that we've tackled kind of, outside of the meeting and come back with our work product and sort of report it back. And I'll just say that those have tended to be more effective than kind of working as a group of whatever around the table. But yeah, I guess to the first question, I just kind of go around the virtual table. How do people feel about taking on this charge and dealing with, introducing a definition of workforce housing to wherever it ought to go? I'm thinking about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point to bring up too, the whole, I don't know how far you're gonna get, everybody sitting around a table trying to come up with something, but certainly, working over, in between in the meetings and stuff, I think maybe we can kind of pool together some ideas and start working on that. Kind of communicate through email maybe, as we regroup, going back over that.
How about if we, what do you think of the idea of reaching out to our counterparts? Maybe it's Polling Housing Authority or Portland Housing Authority. And instead of us reinventing the wheel, see the direction that they've gone in and, maybe take something from that, give us some ideas.
Yeah. Certainly, Dick. I think, there's a whole number of definitions out there in the world. And I think, reaching out to others to see how they've defined it and then, picking one of those definitions that works for our community makes a lot of sense. Eric, is this a task that feels worthy of tackling?
Yeah, I think so. And, I think Tom jokingly said that it's not just about changing percentages, but I'm not convinced of that. I mean, quite honestly, it could be just 80 to 120.
Yeah.
And so it might not be as difficult as we think it is. I think we do have to think about how we monitor that and how that moves forward. Because I do think that we've created a bit of a bureaucracy around some of the affordable stuff that we're doing. And I wouldn't want to do that here, but I don't think we'd have to. I think if it initially on the outset was 80 to 120 and then the market did what the market did, it'd be okay.
That's why I was talking about incentives for developers. So right now, developers can't afford to build something. And I'm even talking about rentals. I mean, forget houses. Even just getting rental units that are affordable for, a certain segment of the population without some incentives, I think it's hard because of, supply chain issues, just what's going on in the market right now. Of course, that could all change on a dime, depending on, what goes on with the feds and whatever. But I mean, it's a big issue. But I'd like to see us do something. I put aside 10 permits that aren't controlled by GMO for someone to build affordable workforce housing. There's 10 permits sitting out there that they don't have to get in line for.
And that's limited to single family.
Yes, single family,
But I think maybe that needs some more attention.
Yeah.
Just the analogous, point would be, of course, affordable. The incentives that we had built in throughout our ordinances are density bonuses, approved for qualified affordable. You could do a similar thing to add in workforce and that same sort of incentive system. GMO exemptions, there's an outright exemption for affordable units. Right now, there's just this starting point of 10 single family unit exemptions right now. That could be grown and made more robust, if you will. But it's all predicated, really, we need a definition so we can define what that is. Know whether someone qualifies or not. And part of that is what Eric alludes to, is how, what is our attention to detail and monitoring and compliance over time as well.
Yeah, and one of the things we've learned from the affordable side of things is that there's two elements to this. One is what does it take to be a qualifying household
Yeah.
living in this workforce housing, and then what does it take to be selling or renting at a qualified price?
Yeah,
And those are two distinct questions. I think it sounds like we are going to decide to shape this policy, but I'd say those are two distinct elements that we ought to focus on in defining this this definition. And then I think once we create the definition, probably the next step is to figure out where in the ecosphere that definition belongs. And then probably once those things are planted, we can then start thinking about what sort of tools can we recommend as incentives and ways to promote
right.
this newly crafted thing.
I can tell you that my fellow councils are very interested. in
Is that
this.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
very interested.
Yeah, for lack of a better approach, what we've done with affordable is in chapter 405, it doesn't matter anything to you, but it's our zoning ordinance, where we define a lot of different things, hundreds of things. That's where this definition exists. So it could be as simple as adding an additional definition of workforce housing that could very closely follow the same kind of format. The committee might recall, we also have a kind of a companion component, which is an affordable housing agreement, which is the actual legal binding piece that's imposed on the deed to assure that, it talks about the qualified buyer and assured affordability going forward. So that's a piece that I think is part of the conversation, but that's maybe phase 2 or 3.
Can I ask a quick question on that? I should know the answers, but I don't. Do we or someone hold a second mortgage, so to
Yes.
speak, or lien on the property to keep it qualified?
Those agreements are recorded against the deed.
It's really
Yeah.
it's a use restriction rather than.
Yeah, okay, or I wasn't
Yeah.
sure how you
Yeah.
did it.
So at the time of sale, we
Yeah.
go through one, and frankly, I would love to have a debrief with this group done to share the details of how that first sale went. But it requires that the next buyer be a qualified buyer, so on and so forth. So it assures affordability going forward.
Because I know Yarmouth Housing had a real issue with trying to keep their housing stock and affordable, because it's no longer any of it that they built in the early 2000s under, they had a special program. They're gone now. I just sold one from it. It was like, I couldn't believe how much it went for.
Well, remember,
So-
that's Habitat's approach. They
Yeah.
concern themselves with the first
The first
buyer and
sale.
only the first buyer. What happens after that is market.
Well, because you do want to help people, build equity. I mean, part of the thing is, building equity is so important for the, maintenance of the middle class, so to speak, to get
Yep.
social worky sounding, but
Yeah.
Yeah, and it might be really important for this group, but I don't know the exact demographic necessarily. I know it's not limited to the recent college graduate, but that's what comes to my mind. That's not limited to that, but this could be the starter home, right? We'd love to get them back into Scarborough.
Yeah.
Set your roots here and build your future.
or as we call it, workforce housing.
Yeah.
The people who make up our workforce, they're the ones out there grinding away 40, 50 hours a week,
Right.
you know.
I mentioned to Tom in the past, maybe to some of you guys, but I attended this, I don't know, it was a Zoom meeting or something about workforce housing, and there was a comment from, I think it was the Commissioner of Housing in Massachusetts, talking about workforce housing and how they think about it. And it was very different from how they think about affordable housing. And sort of the mentality for affordable housing, it's really simplified. It was, it's a way to help folks, who otherwise might not be able to afford their own housing. And it's sort of a general welfare type, approach to building a broad-based community. But the way they were thinking about workforce housing was really as an economic development tool.
Yep.
And a way to, create, benefits really for employers within towns. To show that you've got a geographic location, where, an employer can set up shop and know that employees can live, and afford to live, to make it, a viable place to start a business. And I thought that was kind of an interesting distinction, between, kind of a public benefit type, view of affordable housing and a real economic benefit view to
Right.
workforce housing.
That's a great way to
Yeah,
define it.
Are there a couple of people that want to, work offline and take a first crack at looking at what we've got for a definition of affordable housing?
Brian, is it worth me pulling up the current definition of affordable housing, just as that may serve as a framework to work from?
Yeah, sure, Tom.
I'm not
Maybe
sure
just
if
giving a
everyone's even
reference.
familiar with.
Yeah, that'd be great. And then if there's, a couple of people that want to tackle it.
Do you want to walk through this, Brian?
You can, Tom.
I'm not sure if I can. You do it.
Well, yeah,
Hard enough
so-
time just
Yeah.
steering.
Sure, so, so this is all about defining owner occupied affordable housing, right? So for sale affordable housing,
Right, so you have two categories,
right? So we,
A and B.
right, so the first thing we do is we talk about, what does it take to be a qualifying household to live in this unit? And here we're defining the qualifying household as one that makes 80% or less of the median family income, as published, in this certain publication. So that's what some people will call 80% of AMI.
Right. That's
So
what I was
you'll
trying to-
hear that phrase kind of thrown around. And Jean Marie, I don't know, what was that, 85 grand for?
No, that was the workforce.
Oh.
Yeah, the workforce one for one person is 84,786.
So, and I'll just say kind of parenthetically, generally, when people talk about workforce housing, they're talking about, between 80% and 120% of AMI. That's kind of the band that people talk about. So then the second stage of this definition talks about, what does it take to be affordable? Or, to be charging an allowable amount for this affordable housing unit. And so we go into a little bit of math. And we say, here's this collection of costs that we're going to call your annual housing costs. We say that bunch of costs can't cost more than 30%
Right,
of what somebody who makes 80% of the AMI
right.
for either a 2-person household or a 4-person household, depending upon the size of the house, makes per year.
That's a pretty
And-
much standard real estate rule of thumb with the
Yeah, the
lenders, with the
30%.
mortgage lenders, yeah.
And what that's all about is this, generally accepted definition of affordability in the housing industry and the affordable housing industry that says, you ought not be spending more than 30% of your income on your basic housing costs, which include, your rent, your taxes, and your utilities.
Yeah, that's explained right here in section 2.
And so that's what's going into that annual housing costs. So, as we're defining what it means to be a, I don't know, we would call it an owner occupied workforce housing unit. One could imagine the words that we might change in these existing definitions.
So Brian, can you help? I'm going to stop sharing so we can see each other. You talked about the band between 80 and 120. Why couldn't it be simply picking the upper, can't be more than 120?
Yeah,
Why do we need to concern ourselves with the lower limit?
yeah, that's a good question, Tom. We totally could. We could say 120. And then when I'm the developer of workforce housing,
I'm going to build it
I'm
120.
gonna build at 120.
Right,
And so what you'll never get is housing that's designed for people who make 80 or 90% of.
But
of housing.
if
So,
it's a band, what stops them from doing just that? Still building at the upper end of the band?
well, it depends, right? So one way to stop it would be to say, to be a qualifying household, you could make up to 120. And so anybody who makes up to 120 can live here, but you can't charge more than what would be affordable to somebody making 80%. So now somebody who makes 80% can afford to live there. They would qualify to live there because they make less than 120, and everybody's happy, except maybe
Except for the
maybe the
Yeah,
developer.
I was gonna That's it.
Find somebody to do that.
There's the
So-
piece that's
Or,
missing.
or, you know, maybe you pick 90, or maybe you pick 100, but that's how you kind of create that band of users who can afford to actually buy that housing.
Well, and I guess, I mean, we have to think about, we're talking theory and policy right now, but somebody actually has to find a piece of land, order the lumber and build this home and sell it somewhere between a price point that is 80 and 120. So that's like where the rubber hits the road.
Mhm.
And I'm not seeing that yet completely without some sort of incentive. So in my mind, it's a bit of a simpler equation to say, hey, look, given today's current interest rates, 80 to 120 means that you can sell a house between, I'm going to just choose numbers, between $300,000 and $350,000. So if you can build a house and sell it between $300,000 and $350,000, then that's workforce housing, and you're allowed to get these XYZ incentives that we haven't quite developed yet. And oh, by the way, you can actually get ABC incentives if you're closer to the 80% end of that versus the 120 end of that. So I look at that affordable housing definition and think it's very complicated for what we're trying to accomplish. Rather, if we just set a price point and said, hey, whoever can build houses in between this range and sell it as workforce housing, then come see us. We've got 10 permits for you.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah, and so then Eric, in a case like that, you get away from worrying about what's the right interest rate to think about, and what's the right
Right.
down payment to think about, and all this other
Right.
baloney. And you just pick a price. And maybe you update it every year.
Based on our experience on administering affordable, that would be a heck of a lot easier.
Yeah,
I don't know how do you do that in future years?
exactly.
I mean, it's like, I don't know, CPI or GDP, you just index that.
Right.
Given, I mean, you just sort of revisit it given interest rates. And I mean, and this year may be tough because given the labor supply and as Jean Marie was saying, the cost of building right now, nobody may raise their hand right now. But in a year from now, when supply chains resettle, then everyone may be raising their hand. We just don't know that yet.
Right.
The thing I'm thinking of in that circumstance would be the potential new buyer, the workforce buyer. How are you assuring if you're setting a price like that they're going to have equity? Because that's going to be one of their
Right.
incentives to do it. There's no equity. Why are they doing that?
Well, they
trying
can, they can make money on the sale, but they have to sell it to a then qualified buyer.
No, I was just saying if we're changing that, I don't know.
Oh, so if you're gonna limit the sales price to a certain price.
Well, that sales price has to have some mechanism
Yeah.
of increasing over time. I don't know what
Yeah.
metrics or methodology you build in place, whether it's.
But Michaela has a good point,
Yeah.
because if in certain markets, like the market we're in right now, maybe someone bought something 2 years, well, I'll give you an example. I bet someone who bought something 3 years ago, and they bought it for $240. And I just put it on the market for almost $400. And I'm sure we'll get that, if not more. So it's like, or
And
do
I-
we worry about that, because that's part of what we're trying to do is help this middle class. I don't know.
And I guess my response to that would be good for them,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
right?
That's my feeling too. I mean,
And even, and who
But then
knows?
but then the would-be buyer of that house is likely not
to be,
of the favored class.
Right, you're out of your, yeah. you're
right,
effectively lost it at that
that's
point, yeah.
Yeah.
that's the problem.
But we can't, it's like the stock market, though. We can't predict nor time it. And so if anyone had said 2 years ago when they bought that for $240, that said to them in 2021, you'll be able to sell that for $400, we all would have laughed.
Yes, we
Right.
would have, and I would have been the first one to laugh. I'd have been like, yeah, right.
So, you know, if we were to index allowable prices, you know, from here until whatever, I can imagine one solution being, you've got to sell it to a workforce buyer, you know, at this allowable price, or you can sell it to anybody at any price. But the difference between what you sell it for and the allowable price has to come back to the town. You know, to the workforce housing subsidy pool.
Yeah, but that's your lien. See, that's
Yeah.
so-called second lien on a. or
You know,
whatever.
in other words,
Or maybe
yeah,
as
it
you
makes
say,
it easier, it makes it easier to sell, but you don't get more of a windfall than you otherwise would get.
Yeah, that's, Brian, as you know, that's common across the country. I mean, I
Yeah.
think industry term for that is shared appreciation.
Yeah,
So if it appreciates significantly and you get that benefit, then you share a portion of that back to the provider, which would have been sort of the town.
well, that's like I bought my first house back in ancient times in 1982.
Oh, God. They had houses back then.
Oh, would you stop? And I had the very first issue of Maine State Housing. And I won a lottery to be able to apply for mortgage under Maine State Housing. And that was back when mortgage interest rates were 18%. So I got a buy down. And my buy down was, I believe it was 12% the first year, 13% the second year, and then it was 14%.
Oh, my God.
But if I sold the house between year 1 and I forget now what it was, 7, I think, I'd have to pay back the buy down.
Wow.
And I didn't have a problem with that. Because I believe I sold it within the 7 years and I made a chunk of money, but I paid back Maine State
Yeah.
Housing, whatever, too. So I mean, there are ways to do it, I guess.
so maybe the other way to do it is, as you suggest, in the first instance to the developer building the house, they have that 80 to 120 band. You simply, for subsequent sales, 120, they could go to the max, and then we'll probably search for the buyer to pay the highest price. So,
Right.
yeah, they're gonna get some appreciation, put money in their pocket. It may be less than market would bear otherwise, but at least it
Right.
passes a straight face test that we're still hitting the target market.
Right. And then, of course, you know, the higher these homes sell for over the years, you know, maybe the higher the likelihood that somebody's gonna lose money eventually on one of these houses.
Someone's gonna get cut short.
Yes.
Yeah.
it's-
Because the cycle, the real estate cycle.
I'm gonna believe people buying houses today, it should be
Yeah.
long,
Yeah.
there'll be a point where they're not gonna make that money back, much less appreciation.
I know, I freak out for some of my buyers, but that's another story.
But let's start with the definition anyway,
Yeah.
so then we can talk about how to use it. Anybody wanna work offline and tackling this puppy?
Yeah.
Great.
Happy to help.
Wonderful. And Tom, where is that definition of affordable?
I'll send it around to the group,
Yeah.
but it's embedded in chapter 4 or 5 of the zoning ordinance.
Yeah.
It's just, that's a 500-page document, so it's a bear.
Yeah,
Exactly.
appreciate
Michaela,
that.
you are the definitions chair.
Yeah.
It is all alphabetized, so look for A.
Ah, great.
That's easy enough. There you go.
Yeah, you don't have to go all the way down.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's great. So we'll start off with the definition and then kind of move on from there, and I think this will be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if a group, a handful of you could come, put some ideas together, I think that's the best way for a group, for this group to kind of draft it on the fly, it's gonna be painful, so
Yeah.
having something to review and react to.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. All right, so, Tom, we alluded to this earlier in the meeting, but, next on the agenda is home sale procedures recap. This may be teeing up a conversation in our next meeting, but.
Yeah, I really need to dust off and remind myself of that experience. But about a year ago, we did have the sale, I guess the second sale, for the first time, of one of the homes in the Downs, first phase of the Downs. And Brian was kind enough to assist me to work through that. That market was similarly hot to this, maybe not as hot. And so yeah, there's some lessons to be learned. Unfortunately, the sale happened during a crazy market, but nonetheless, we did work it through, and happy seller, happy buyer, it all seemed to be a success, but I think this group would be interested to hear some of the particulars.
Yeah,
And I think we did bring some of the basics to you and got some guidance. So perhaps for the next meeting, we can actually prepare that and use that as a bit of a case study, if you will.
Yeah.
And I suspect there'll be others coming our way. Who knows when? Again, we're made aware of that because each of these properties has an agreement recorded against the deed.
Mhm.
And so even if the owner of the home is unaware that that exists or forgotten or would like to ignore it, they can't.
Right.
So my phone will ring. And I guess we should learn from that experience and just be better prepared for the next one.
Tom, I think, one thing I remember from that experience is that we've got this universe or this inventory of housing that exists in the world right now that has a certain set of use restrictions on it. That I think is the same as the use restrictions on the house that sold. So there's a certain set of things we can learn from that and maybe how to handle a future sale. But it may be the case that we learn about some tweaks that we want to make for future homes that get built within this program. And so I think as we're talking, we ought to think about it as kind of two different buckets of homes. How do we administer what we've got, and then if we were to have a version 2, what would we want it to look like?
Yeah, one of the fundamental questions that was first asked to me, and Michaela and Jean Marie will certainly appreciate this, that the owner of the home and the broker said, well, what can we list it for? And I think we've actually consulted with this group, provided some advice back, and things ended up a little differently. The actual sale price was much higher than that number we gave them.
Yeah.
But it was still to a qualified buyer.
Oh, good, okay.
Great. So next meeting, Tom, we'll bring something back, kind of a recap, and
Yes.
talk about that. Terrific. Great. Well, next item on the agenda is public comment. Anybody from the public here that might want to comment?
How do I get,
No,
We have
to
no
the
attendees.
participants. Oh,
You're
yeah.
right.
Yeah. I jinxed us.
Choose not to
Oh,
be
yeah,
here.
this is our first meeting since the break, so. Great. Well, before the next item on the agenda, is there anything else that anybody wants to add to the agenda and talk about tonight? This is a historically quick meeting.
I just want to go back on the workforce piece. I saw the two of you kind of agreed to collaborate. And is there anyone else? Not that I necessarily need to be part of that.
I assume that we could probably put something together and then shuffle it around to the email too. Just
Sure.
kind of, I think that might be the easiest of the.
Yeah, just for public purposes and transparency, I guess what you'll do is share your draft publicly at the next meeting.
Yeah.
No decisions
Yeah.
can be made. Okay.
Yeah.
That works.
Yeah, it's kind of like a brainstorming session there.
Okay.
Dick, anything more from you that you want to add to the agenda?
No, I'm good.
We're looking at workforce housing,
Yes.
thank you.
Bill Donovan, how about you?
I'm good. If there was a workforce housing ordinance out there in the greater Portland area, that would help. I think those of you who are volunteering to try to initiate
Portland's
the
got
draft.
something like that.
So I don't know if Tom's staff could chase that a little bit.
Yeah, we can put some time in. Another point I'll just raise, and this group might want to get involved on the workforce front. Eric alluded to the fact that there needs to be a subsidy for this to happen in a big way. We might get one-offs and but for us to make appreciable difference here with multiple units, probably on the rental side, I suspect, there really needs to be some alignment with the priorities of main housing and the
Yes,
qualification for tax credits. I did talk to John Brennan a couple of months back, and there is an annual process through QAP that we could be involved with.
for
if we
Main
wish.
Street housing.
Yeah, which is the scoring criteria. And historically, the last several years, senior affordable seems to be the real focus, and there's still a huge need, 10,000 units statewide. So I don't mean to suggest otherwise, but the QAP needs to be geared in such a way that these sorts of projects are favored and can get funded.
Right, and that was my point with that committee I spoke in front of, too.
Tom, I'll mention, this is, I think probably way out there, but there's at the federal level, there's talk about creating a new tax credit. Right now, the low income housing tax credit is called the LIHTC.
Yeah.
They're talking about creating a MITEC credit or middle income
Oh,
housing tax credit, which would be perfect for this type of workforce housing. So I think us creating a definition now that could align with the future
Right.
program is really forward thinking and good position as well.
does the tax credit go to the owner or to the developer?
Well, in a large scale development,
Right.
it goes to the owner and then they sell it to investors to bring in the equity to pay for the development. So that acts as the
Kind of
subsidy.
like what's
That acts as
going
the
on in
subsidy.
Cape Elizabeth, that's got some people wound up.
Well,
It's
Oh,
true,
okay,
that's
never
the-
mind, we'll
yeah.
talk later.
Yeah, I mean, so that's what acts as the subsidy that you're talking about, Jean Marie, to actually make these
Yes,
worth doing.
yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of,
A couple of thoughts too. We should parse through the American Rescue Plan funding too, because there may be dollars in there for something like this. There's dollars flying everywhere for housing, and whether it's low income or middle income or whatever it may be. So we may want to pay attention to that. Also, I do think that there's a couple of communities. I think there's one going up in Kennebunk, and there's one going up in York. This concept of of workforce housing. I don't know. I think the one in Kennebunk, the developer's just doing it out of the goodness of his heart, what it seems, but there may be more to it than that. So we may want to poke around that one a little bit too. And then I know when I was living in Seacoast, New Hampshire, that developer Eric Chinberg was doing a lot of what he was calling workforce housing down there. How he defined that, I don't know. I think they were just generally modest homes built on less desirable land, so we sold them for less. So I don't know.
And that gets into this whole thing of what this commission that I testified before was talking about, the racism and elitism and whatever. Okay, great, put these things up on trash land,
yeah, it's
you know,
economic
or
justice.
I know, but it's like,
Tom,
again, market forces.
Is there somebody within, working for the town, either inside or outside, kind of scouring the American Rescue Plan for resources for the town?
We've just started that. We
Yeah.
kind of put it out of our minds for the summer. We have the luxury of some time.
Yeah.
For those that don't know, the town has about 2.2 million in those funds. And we need to sort through, see what qualifies and how we're going to spend it. So there is likely an opportunity for this group to make a pitch for some of those funds.
So that brings us to the last bullet point. Anybody want to make a motion?
So moved.
I knew it was gonna come from Bill.
All right. Bill. So, all in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned at 6:54 for those keeping track.
Eric,
Thank you.
Eric, have you still taking on the task of,
Keeping track.
thank you. Well done,
All
sir.
right, thank you, Eric.
See you all.
All right,
Thank you.
thanks, guys.
Good night, all.